This will be the last recording for Chapter 23. We're starting with slide number 57, and we're going to talk about the angiosperms or flowering plants. Where gymnosperm meant naked seed, angiosperm means covered seed. And covered is referring to the fruit that covers the seeds. Okay, so angiosperms are the flowering plants. This is a very large and successful group of plants with 352,000 known species. All fruits, vegetables, nuts, herbs, and grains are angiosperms. The angiosperms also provide us with clothing, food, medicine, and other valuable products. So, very important. Angiosperms are divided into monocots and eudicots. And monocot is short for monocotyledon, and eudicot is short for eudicotyledon, or sometimes even shortened even further to just dicots. But monocots include corn, tulips, pineapples, and sugarcane. And if you can visualize the leaves of a corn plant or a tulip flower, you realize that the veins or vascular tissue in those leaves runs parallel. They're kind of long and thin leaves, and then the veins run parallel to each other. Whereas the eudicots, such as cactus, strawberries, dandelions, poplars, and bean plants, have leaves that the veins are kind of form a netted pattern. So the cotyledon, the word cotyledon refers to the seed leaf. In a monocot, there's only one cotyledon or one seed leaf inside of the seed, and in a eudicot, there are two cotyledons in the seed. This is an important table for you to make sure you know the differences between monocots and eudicots. Besides having monocots having only one cotyledon and eudicots having two, monocots also have flower parts in threes, and eudicots have flower parts in fours or fives. And monocots have a pollen grain that only has one pore, and eudicots, the pollen grain has three pores, and you'd have to look at the pollen grain under the microscope to see that. Usually monocots are herbaceous rather than like trees. Eudicots can be woody or herbaceous. The venation or vein pattern in monocots is parallel, whereas in eudicots, it is a netted pattern. If you look at the stem in cross-section, there are bundles of vascular tissue in monocots that are just scattered, whereas in eudicots, those vascular bundles form a ring, so they're more organized. If you look at the roots of a monocot, it's going to have a bushy fibrous root system, whereas a eudicot is going to have a long taproot system. You can see a monocot flower has three petals here, and it's got three sepals. The sepals are the green leaves underneath those white petals. And then we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 anthers, which are the tips of the stamens or male parts of the flower. So all of these flower parts are either there's three of them or multiples of three. And then for the eudicot flower that we're looking at here, there are 5 petals and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those male stamens. The flower, these are some notes on the flower itself. Flowers can vary widely in appearance, but most have the following structures. They have sepals, which are the green leaves that form the bud before the flower opens. And collectively, all the sepals are called the calyx. And their purpose is to protect the flower before it's ready to open. Petals are called, all the petals together are called the corolla, and they're often used to attract pollinators. Stamens are the male structures, and they have two parts. The stalk is called the filament, and then the part at the end that produces pollen is called the anther. If you remember, antheridia were the male parts in some of the plants that we discussed earlier. Carpels are the female parts, and sometimes they're even called not carpels but pistils. But they have a stigma, which is the tip of it, and it's sticky to allow for pollen to land on it and stick to it. And then the stalk is called the style, and then the big round part that eventually ripens into a fruit is called the ovary, and it will enclose one or more ovules. The ovules will become the seed. The ovary will become the fruit. And here we can look at all of the different flower structures. This looks very much like a lily. I don't know for sure that that's what it is. It looks like a kind of a wild lily. I use them sometimes in the in-person labs. So you can see, let's start down here with the sepals. There are 5 sepals, so this is definitely a eudicot. There are 5 petals, and I'm thinking probably 10. I don't know for sure, but there should be multiples of 5 stamens. And notice that the stamen contains a filament and then the anther at the tip. And then you have one carpel, and that carpel has a stigma, which is where the pollen lands and sticks to it because it's sticky, a style, and an ovary, and inside the ovary is the ovule or ovules, which contain the egg. And the ovule will eventually become the seed. The ovary will eventually become the fruit. Let's see, flowering plants are heterosporous, so they produce megaspores and microspores. The megaspore develops into the female gametophyte, and this is important. You need to know that the female gametophyte of a flowering plant is the embryo sac. There are normally 7 cells within the embryo sac. One of those cells is an egg, and then one has 2 polar nuclei, because they're called polar because they come from opposite ends of the embryo. And these are really the only cells that we're going to focus on. There are 7 total, so there's 5 cells that we're really not going to worry about. But I want you to know that I want you to know about the egg cell and then the cell that contains the 2 polar nuclei, because when we talk about how the seed is produced, that will be important. The microspores will eventually become the male gametophytes, which are the pollen grains. A pollen grain has only 3 cells. It has a tube cell that grows into the pollen tube that will carry the sperm to the egg. And then it has 2 sperm cells. And we're going to talk about a process called double fertilization, because it takes 2 sperm cells to fertilize the female gametophyte and to make a seed. And we'll talk about that. It's called double fertilization because 2 sperm cells are required. So during pollination, pollen is transported from the anther, which is part of the male flower structure, to the stigma, which is the female part. And the tube cell will grow a pollen tube, starting with the stigma, and it will grow down the style of the female part until it reaches the ovule. The 2 sperm will travel through the tube to the opening of the ovule, and then what will occur is a process called double fertilization. One sperm will fertilize an egg, and that will form a diploid zygote, which will eventually become the embryo of the plant and grow into the adult plant. The second sperm will unite with the polar nuclei, and that will form a not diploid or haploid, but a triploid, which means it has 3 sets of chromosomes. a triploid endosperm nucleus, and that will end up becoming the endosperm, which is the stored food, and the seed coat. So the second sperm is going to eventually it's going to form into the endosperm, which is the stored food inside the seed. The fruit is the ripened ovary, and it protects the seeds and also can help with seed dispersal. And this is the life cycle of the flowering plant, focusing on the double fertilization, where you have one sperm that fertilizes the egg and the other sperm that fertilizes the two polar nuclei, and you get an entire seed from that. And remember that the seed has three parts. It has an embryo, it has endosperm, which is stored food, and then it has a seed coat. The diversity of flowers, of course, we have a great diversity among flowers. Some of them smell good, some don't. Some don't have much of a smell. Some smell bad, Some flowers attract flies because they have such a bad smell. Wind-pollinated flowers are not usually showy. They don't have big, bright-colored petals, and they don't usually have a strong smell. Bird-pollinated and insect-pollinated flowers are often colorful to attract the insects and the birds. And night-blooming flowers are usually white or cream-colored, and they smell really good because you're attracting nocturnal mammals or insects. So they're attracted to the smell rather than the color. Now, these are some terms involved in flowering plants. If we say it is a complete flower, it has all four parts: sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. If it's incomplete, then it's going to lack one or more of those parts. If it's a perfect flower, it has both stamens and carpels. So, for example, you can have a perfect, complete flower. If it's complete, it is perfect. Do you understand why? Because if it's complete, then that means it has all four parts. Perfect means it has stamens and carpels. So a complete flower is already perfect. But you can have an incomplete perfect flower so maybe it has stamens and carpels, that makes it perfect, but it's incomplete because it doesn't have sepals, But if the flower is imperfect, then it's automatically incomplete, and it has stamens or carpels, but not both. Inflorescence means a cluster of flowers, and composite means that it appears to be a single flower, but it's actually a group of tiny flowers. Okay, so this is going to be the end of the recordings for chapter 23.